Welcome to Frame to Funnel, the show that connects corporate video to the sales funnel it was always meant to feed. Every episode, we look at how smart organizations are using video to drive real pipeline, attracting the right buyers, moving them through the funnel, and turning content into conversations that close. I'm Paul Joseph, and this is where video strategy meets revenue strategy. Let's get into it. The film looked good. You know it looked good because the agency played you the grade in a glass wall room and you felt something. The music lifted at the right moment. The CEO's soundbite landed. The cinematography was clean, properly lit, properly colored. The kind of visual finish that signals money was spent and spent well. You approved the final cut on a Friday afternoon, and by Monday morning, it was live on the homepage and seeded across LinkedIn. 6 months later, someone in your revenue team asked what it drove, and you went quiet. Not because you didn't have an answer, because you knew the answer was nothing you could defend in a pipeline review. The film had views, it had likes. The CEO had tagged some senior contacts at target accounts, and few of them had commented something warm. But when the demand gen team ran the attribution, properly ran it, looked for a thread between a video view and a closed deal, there was nothing there. Zero. 125,000, give or take. 12 weeks of production, a full agency relationship, and a pipeline contribution that could not be traced. That moment, the gap between a beautiful asset and a traceable result, is the entire reason this show exists. I'm Paul Joseph, 19 years of B2B experience across telecom, fintech, and enterprise. A cinematographer who now produces the video those vendors should have made. I have understood on both sides of the brief, as the buyer signing the purchase order and the operator behind the camera. And the same breakdown happens on both sides, every time for the same reason. This is Frame to Funnel, where corporate video meets the revenue system. Every episode is a teardown, a symptom, a broken link, an anonymized example drawn from pattern I have seen repeat across sectors and geographies, and a fix you can apply the same week. The audience for this show is not video producers. It's not for agency creatives. It is the person who signs the brief and the person who has to justify it 6 months later. CMOs, head of marketing, and demand gen. Founders who control the budget and are now starting to ask whether corporate video is an asset or a sunk cost. Episode 1, The Manifesto. Here is the thesis this entire show is built on. Corporate video fails consistently, expensively, and silently because it is designed as a deliverable, not a component or a revenue system. The three things that you should operate as one chain almost never do. Lead generation, the goal; martech, the plumbing; corporate video, the fuel. Break any link in that chain and the asset becomes decoration. Very expensive, very well produced decoration. And someone will put it in a board deck as evidence that marketing is active, which is the most damaging thing a failed asset can become. Today I'm going to show you exactly how the chain breaks. I'm going to walk through a composite example drawn from a real pattern across B2B technology businesses. And I'm going to give you the first diagnostic framework this show will build on. 3 questions in a specific order that should be asked before any brief is written. Let me name the 3 links properly because the vocabulary matters and I will use it throughout every episode this show produces. Link 1, lead generation. This is the goal, not brand awareness, not share of voice, not impressions on a LinkedIn post. A qualified conversation with someone who has the authority to buy and the problem your product or service solves. Every asset, every piece of content, every video that marketing produces is only valuable if it is traceable, directly or indirectly, back to the qualified conversation. If it cannot be traced, it's not marketing spend, it's communications spend. And communications spend answers to a different mandate than pipeline. Link 2, martech. This is the plumbing, the CRM, the marketing automation platform, the attribution layer, the trigger logic that is supposed to turn a viewed asset into a tracked contact into a scored lead, and a scored lead into a sales conversation. Most companies have built this infrastructure. Most companies have not connected it to their video. The content fires into the void, and the plumbing sits empty, perfectly functional, waiting for a signal that never arrives because nobody thought to pipe the signal through. Link 3, corporate video. This is the fuel, not the strategy, not the goal, the fuel. It exists to push someone through the system, to create the signal the plumbing can capture, and move the signal towards a conversation. The moment you treat the video as a system itself, rather than an input to the system, you have already lost the argument about what it drove. The failure mode is almost always identical. The video is commissioned as link 3 with no reference to link 1 or 2. The brief describes what goes on screen, the look, the feel, the duration, the creative treatment, the deliverable. It almost never describes the job the asset needs to do in the funnel. What stage of the buyer journey is the asset for? What action should a viewer take immediately after watching? What does the martech system do the moment they take the action? Where does the contact land inside the CRM? What sequence fires next? Nobody wrote that in the brief, so nobody built it, so nothing fired. And 6 months later, the attribution is empty, and the only thing left is the sunk cost and a very good looking piece of video real estate on a homepage that most pipeline ready buyers will never visit. There is a principle in B2B demand generation research that I want to anchor this episode on. It comes from a paper called the 95:5 Rule, Professor John Dawes of the Eisenberg Pass Institute, and published through the LinkedIn B2B Institute. It's one of the most important pieces of research published in B2B marketing in the last decade, and it reframes the entire conversation about what corporate video is actually for. The finding is this. At any given moment, roughly 95% of your addressable market is not in an active buying cycle. They are not evaluating vendors. They are not raising their hand. They are not filling a form or requesting a demo or engaging with your retargeting. They are living inside what researchers call the dark funnel. Reading, watching, listening, forming opinions, building shortlists in their heads, and leaving almost no traceable signal while they do it. They know who you are. They are watching what you put out. They are deciding quietly whether you belong to the list of companies they will consider when the buying cycle opens. The 5% who are in the active cycle right now are already talking to someone. The question is whether that someone is you. And the answer depends almost entirely on what you did during the 6 months that the buyer spent in dark. Now here is the structural problem that corporate video almost never accounts for. Most brand films are aimed, consciously or not, at the 5%. They are designed to close, not to cultivate. They are built for someone who is already in evaluation, already comparing, already close to a decision, and they arrive too late and too generic to actually move that person. Meanwhile, the 95% sitting in the dark, watched your film on LinkedIn, felt something, forgot the company name by Thursday, and built their shortlist without you on it. This is not a creative problem. The film can be excellent and still fail the test. This is a structural problem, a brief problem, a system problem, and it is exactly the problem this show exists to name. There is a second data point worth holding alongside the 95:5 rule. MQL volume across B2B has been in structural decline for 3 consecutive years. The buyers who used to raise their hands early, filling in a form or downloading a white paper, clicking through nurture sequence, responding to a cold outreach, are now doing 6, 8, sometimes 12 months of private research before making any contact at all. The form fill is not the beginning of their journey. It is end of their private one. And if your video never touched them during these months in the dark, you were not part of the shortlist. This is the environment where corporate video brief is written inside. Most briefs do not acknowledge it exists. The company I'm going to walk through is a composite. The details are drawn from the pattern I have observed multiple engagements in B2B technology sector. No single company, no single sector, every company. Mid-market, B2B software, annual contract values in the low 6 figures, sales cycles of 3 to 6 months, a marketing team of 8 people, experienced, well organized, operating with a properly configured CRM and a marketing optimization platform that by any way external measure was doing its job. The head of demand gen knew what attribution looked like. The CMO had been pipeline reviews before. These are not amateurs. 18 months before I encountered them, they commissioned a brand film. The brief was written by the marketing team in a collaboration with an agency that came up well recommended and had a strong show reel. The budget was approved at board level, 125,000 give or take in their base currency, positioned internally as a step change on how the company went to market. The first piece of video content that had ever properly invested in. The brief the agency received described the company, its founding story, its values, its people, the quality of its culture, the problem it solved, and the ambition it carried for its customers. It was the standards of most corporate briefs and a thorough document. 3 pages, clear aesthetic references, an agreed duration of 3 minutes, a delivery date that worked around the quarterly board meeting. What the brief did not contain any reference to a pipeline goal, any named buyer journey stage, any description of what a viewer would do after watching, any mention of how the market system would respond to a view event, any framework for measuring success in terms the revenue team could use. The agency produced what the brief asked for. This is important. The agency did not fail here. The agency delivered precisely the asset that brief requested, a 3-minute brand film with a proper grade and a commission score, a CEO soundbite that landed the genuine authority, and an emotional arc that made the internal team feel proud. It won an internal award, one of those moments of shared recognition that a marketing team gives itself to mark a milestone. It went live on the home page. It was seeded to LinkedIn with a post from the CEO tagging a handful of senior contacts at a named target accounts. And few of those contacts watched it, some commented it. The initial 30 days produced 40 some thousand views, which appeared as the marketing slides and looked like momentum. Then it settled into a long term trajectory, a few 100,000 views a month, predominantly from existing customers checking the company out, job candidates doing their research, and people in industry who knew the brand. The audience it was reaching was not the audience it was built to move. When the demand gen team ran the proper attribution 12 months after launch, ahead of annual budget review, they found nothing. They could not take into pipeline meeting. Not a single deal closed with a traceable thread back to the film. Not one. Let me be precise about where the chain broke, because there were 3 breaks, not one, and each was independent of the others. Break 1. The brief described as a deliverable, not a job. The brief specified what the film should look like and how long it should run. It did not name a pipeline goal. It did not say whether it's an asset was designed for awareness, consideration, or intent. It did not define what a viewer who was a genuine prospect should do next. Without a named job, the asset had no success condition that connected to the revenue. It had a creative success condition, which it met. And it had a distribution success condition, view count, engagement, reach, which it also met. Neither of those conditions had anything to do with pipeline. Break 2. The martech layer was never activated. The film lived in two places, the homepage and LinkedIn. Neither placement had conversation logic attached to it. When a known contact from a target account watched more than half of the film on LinkedIn, nothing happened inside the CRM. No trigger fired. No sequence activated. No sales alert went out. LinkedIn's native video analytics did not pass viewer identity into an external CRM unless you have built in specific enrichment and integration logic around it. The kind of logic that had to be designed before the asset is distributed, not reverse engineered after the fact. That logic never had discussed. It was not in the brief. It was not in the agency's scope. The plumbing was there, but it was not connected. Break 3. The asset was built for no specific buyer journey stage, which means it was built for all of them simultaneously, which means it served none of them adequately. The person in active evaluation, in that 5%, comparing vendors close to a decision, needed proof, numbers, case studies, specifics, the kind of evidence that moves to shortlist. The brand film gave them emotion and an origin story. The person sitting in the dark funnel, the 95%, needed a sharper point of view, a distinctive claim, a signal that this company understood the problem at a level no competitor had articulated. The brand film gave them values and culture. Both audience left with a feeling, neither left with a reason to act. The 125,000 did not produce zero leads because the film was bad. It produced zero leads because it was not designed to produce leads. It was designed to win internal approval, and it succeeded at the job completely. The framework I want to give you today is the one that should have been applied before the brief was written. I call it the casual chain. The same three link structure I opened this episode with, used not as a post mortem, but as a pre commission gate. Run these questions before any video set is briefed. If you cannot answer all three, the brief is not ready to leave the building. Question 1. What is the pipeline goal this asset serves? Not the marketing goal, not the brand goal, the pipeline goal. Which stage of the buyer journey? Awareness, in the dark funnel, active consideration, or late stage intent? Is this asset designed for? What qualified conversation is it upstream of? And how many steps upstream is it? If the answer is it's a brand film, it speaks to everyone, that is not an answer. It's a description of an asset that has been deliberately disconnected from the revenue system it is supposed to feed. Name the stage. Name the buyer's state of mind at the moment they encounter this film. Name what you need them to believe, feel, or decide after watching. And make that brief, feeling, or decision measurable. Question 2. What does the martech system do when someone engages with this asset? Not in theory. In practice, in your actual stack, with your actual integrations, on the actual platforms where the film will live. If the asset is on LinkedIn, what enrichment layer are you running against? The view data to pull known contacts into your CRM? Not in theory, in practice, in your actual stack, with your actual integrations on the actual platforms where the film will live. If the asset is on LinkedIn, what enrichment layer are you running against? The view data to pull known contacts into your CRM. If it lives on your website, what event fires in your automation platform when a prospect watches beyond the halfway point? What is the next asset in the sequence they receive? Who in the sales team gets alerted and when? If you cannot answer these questions with specifics, the plumbing is not connected. Do not commission the asset until it is. The production budget is not the investment. The martech configuration is the investment. The film is the signal that travels through. Question 3. What action does a viewer take at the end of the film? One action, specific and singular. Not they feel inspired by the brand, not they might visit the website. What page do they land on? What offer is waiting for them? What is the conversation event? And what is the CRM record when it fires? A video without a named viewing action at the end is a closed loop. The viewer watched, they left, and you have no idea who were there, what they thought, or whether they belong in a pipeline. Every view you cannot capture is a contact you cannot nurture. Every contact you cannot nurture is a buyer who builds their shortlist without you. 3 questions. Run them in the order because that order is dependency chain. If you cannot name the pipeline goal, you cannot configure the martech trigger because you do not know what state of mind you're triggering towards or what sequence should follow. If you cannot configure the martech trigger, the viewer action is irrelevant because even if they act, you will not capture that signal. The chain runs forward and it runs on one direction only. Apply these 3 questions retrospectively to the composite example. The brand film had no named goal. The brief positioned it as a brand. The martech layer never configured. It was not in the scope. There were no named viewer action. The film ended on the company logo and a URL. The 3 breaks, all independent, all preventable, all caught by 3 questions that should have been asked on day 1. The 125,000 did not need to produce zero. The same budget, the same creative quality, the same distribution connect to a named pipeline goal at a specific buyer journey stage will trigger logic built into the automation platform, and a single concrete action waiting for the viewer at the end would have looked very different in the attribution report. Not because the film would have changed, because the system around it would have existed. This is the diagnostic. This is what the show does every episode. This is the thesis of frame to funnel, and this is the framework the show will be built on, one teardown at a time. The casual chain is the foundation. In the episodes ahead, I will go deeper into each link, how to configure the martech layer for a video specifically, how to map asset type to buyer journey stage, how to brief a video that has a measurable job before a single camera moves. Each episode follows the same structure: a symptom, a diagnosis, a teardown, a named system you can use. The most useful thing you can do right now, if this episode landed, is to follow the show. Not as a favor, because episode 2 picks exactly where this one ends. And if you're in the middle of a video right now, or heading into a budget conversation where you need to defend spend and you cannot yet attribute, what comes next will be directly applicable. That's a wrap on this episode of Frame to Funnel. If this gave you one thing you can take back to your organization, a question to ask, a gap to fix, a brief to rewrite, then it's done its job. New episodes drop every week. Subscribe wherever you listen and visit frametofunnel.com for more resources on building a video strategy that actually moves pipeline. See you in the next one.